Hi everybody, I'm Joey Paul and I'm an indie author, and today we're going to be talking about questions from writers. I've gotten a few questions from other writers or aspiring authors, and I thought I would approach some of them in this video and go from there really. So I've got 10 of the ones that I felt were best to answer, and here we go. Number 1, do you use the same editor and proofreader for each book and why? I do. I didn't used to. I started off with an editor who changed with each book depending on what the book was about, and then I found an editor that worked well with me and worked well with the stories that I was writing, and it worked better to stay with the editor. And then I changed to a different editor and proofreader at the same time, and now that they are my main team and they basically proofread and edit each manuscript, it doesn't matter what the subject is, and I do that because we work well together, we have a good idea of what we're trying to achieve, and it works well for me, so I stay with it. Number 2, how do you outline and what type do you recommend? I've talked about this in more than one video, but I thought I'd address it again. I do minimalistic outlining, so I wouldn't recommend my style for a newbie writer. I would recommend doing outlining through other methods. As far as what type, I don't know the types of outlining because I haven't really looked into it, because it's not something that I do. I have a system that works for me, and because of that I stick to it. But if you're looking for ways to outline, then my advice would be to either look for other writers on YouTube who do talk about outlining, or to Google it basically, which I know sounds really passé and flippant, but sorry. Number 3, what kind of promo do you do before a release, and does it work for you? I usually start about 3-4 months before release. Because I've already got 11 books out, I will start in about November time, starting to get things ready for the next release, which will be in March, and then that continues on, and I start adding things in about February for the release in July. And it's a bit hit and miss at the moment, and it's not all working for me brilliantly because I really just started releasing 2 books at once, so there's a lot of crossover, but I am pretty confident in what I'm doing. I do things like ARC, I do things like releasing blitzes, I do things like cover reveals and stuff like that, and I position them all at certain points through the month, through the months leading up to the release. Does it work for me? Yeah, it generally does. The ARC reviews me and I get reviews up on release day or shortly after, and that helps with visibility, and the pre-orders mean that I get pre-orders which help with visibility on release day, so it all works out for me, and I find that my plan is working for me. At the same time, I'm still tweaking bits and pieces to get more visibility because there's no such thing as too much, and so far I haven't had a chance to really try that out, but I'm working on it. Number 4, how long do you recommend letting a book sit before you start the editing process? I think that really depends from writer to writer. I personally will write a book and let it sit for a good couple of years before I start the editing process. The books I'm about to start editing were written about 2-3 years ago, so for me that's a good period, but you don't have to wait that long. I do so because I have so many books in reserve, and once I don't have books in reserve, then I'll shorten that time period. But I like to have as long as possible between finishing the book and editing the book. So yeah, I would recommend at least a month, 2 maybe, and go from there really. Number 5, what's your working week like? Basically, if we start, depending on where the month starts, because that's where how my week starts, I'll do 4 days on, 1 day off, and then another 4 days on. So I will start, if the month starts on a Monday, I will do 2 days of writing, 2 days of writing another book, a day off where I will record a vlog and watch some TV and do some chilling out stuff, and then I will have another 4 days of writing 2 of each book, and before another day off. Sometimes I don't get those days off because I've taken them unexpectedly in the week, but generally speaking I do. And number 6, would you advise the traditional indie/self-publishing route? I would advise that you do what works for you. The indie route works for me and has worked for me, and I'm very happy being indie and self-published. But I have done the traditional route and I found that it didn't work for me, which is why I don't do traditional. And a lot of writers these days are now doing indie by default because they find that it works better. So I think it really is a personal decision about what works for you. What are you hoping to achieve? Are you wanting to stay in complete control? Do you have the skills to market yourself, the skills to promote yourself, and the skills to get your book out there? And if not, then do you have the funds to hire someone to help you? And if you do you then want to go through indie publishing, or do you want to go through traditional publishing? It really does depend on the writer, and I'm not going to sit there and say you should do one or the other. Number 7, how much of the publishing process do you do yourself? I don't do any of the editing, I don't do any of the proofreading, I do the formatting myself, and I do the writing, obviously, but I don't do covers either. Those are done by my cover designer, editing done by my editor, proofreading done by my proofreader, but the majority, the rest of it is usually done with me. I will do organise cover reveals, and I will organise release day blitzes, and I will organise my blog and stuff like that. That's stuff that I do. But the rest of it is done by other people. Number 8, what programs do you use to write and why? I basically, on my computer, I use OpenOffice to write. I used to stick to just Word, but I had a few problems with Word eating my chapters, so I switched to OpenOffice. I still have Word because OpenOffice isn't as good at formatting as Word is, so I use that at the end of the manuscript so that I can format it properly for paperback, for ebook, etc, etc. On my tablet I use Office Suite Pro because it interacts perfectly with OpenOffice and Word, and that's all I want really. I know there are loads of different apps out there to do it, but I've been using Word since I was a little kid, so it makes sense to stick with what you know really. Number 9, you mostly write in first person. Which would you advise for young adult contemporary? Again, this is going to be one of those questions where I say things and people wonder whether I know what I'm talking about. But I think it depends on what kind of story you're going to tell, and I think there's something wrong with having it in first person. I personally write, yes, a lot in first person, but that's because of the stories that I'm telling. There was one book I think that was written in third person, but personally I prefer first person. I prefer first person when I'm reading, so that's one of the reasons why I write in it. But I think it depends on what kind of story you're talking about here. If it's you're just telling me it's a young adult contemporary, well, that can be either first person, third person, whatever. It doesn't need to be, there's no set rules of what should be done. I think if you find that you're more comfortable writing in first person, then write in first person. If you find you're more comfortable writing third person, then write in third person. It really is just that simple. And number 10, how long does it on average take you to finish a book? What would you consider normal? Back when I first started writing, it took me about 2 years. Now it takes me anywhere from about 3 to about 6 months. I write 2 at the same time, so I get 2 books done in that time. However, if you're just starting out, I wouldn't sit there and say that because you're not at that level of productivity that therefore it's not normal. I think it takes as long as it takes. I think if you have a book you're trying to write and it takes longer to finish, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. I think it just takes as long as it takes. I would imagine that a year, 2 years is about the norm of people writing, and that's completely okay. First draft, second draft, third draft, it depends what you're talking about by finish a book. If you mean finish from first word to proofread and ready to publish, then it's a lot longer. But if you mean first word to the first draft, then it's a lot shorter. So I think basically that it takes as long as it takes, and as long as you're working towards that goal, then you shouldn't get too caught up in how long it takes. So that's it basically, that's all I have time for today, and that's all the questions I have so far. So if you want to get in touch with me, you can do so by leaving a comment down below, subscribing to my channel, or you can find me on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Goodreads, on Twitter. My books are available on Amazon in ebook and paperback format, and I also have a newsletter, and I post new videos on Thursdays, so be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, bye!